Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Building Thinkers podcast. Today I'm excited to share a conversation with Gretchen Fox Palmer. Texas born and raised, Gretchen had to run away to find herself. She spent 22 years building a successful Fortune 500 career on the West Coast, working with high-profile artists and clients, becoming a Forbes published author, and founding a seven-figure business. But it was during her tenure as vice president of marketing at Live Nation that she experienced a moment that led her to commit fully to conscious leadership. And who better than someone who self-describes as a former toxic executive to help other leaders with those same realizations? Now Gretchen teaches performance-driven organizations, teams, and leaders through her EQ at Work program, focused on 5 EQ skills that can rescue employees from burnout. Her approach to emotional regulation and resilience is what has taken her from merely surviving to truly thriving. In our conversation, we explored the question, how might we increase flow and creativity to bring joy to work? Gretchen opened up about her own journey of self-awareness, including how she recognized and dismantled her own hypervigilance at work, leading to immediate positive changes in her team's culture. Gretchen blends high-performance leadership with a balanced, intentional life at Kensho Stables, her 25-acre horse ranch in the beautiful Texas Hill Country. Whether you're a leader, a team member, or someone striving for personal growth, I think you'll find Gretchen's story and insights incredibly valuable. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Gretchen Fox Palmer. All right, welcome to the Building Thinkers podcast. Today I'm so excited to be joined by
Gretchen Fox Palmer.
Gretchen, I'm so excited. Thank you so much for joining. Let's start with, where did we meet? How did we get connected?
We met when you attended my horse-human connection workshop, which was really actually one of the greatest groups that I've ever had. It's always a surprise to me who the different people are that show up. And sometimes they're harder than others because of the dynamics between the group. And your group was one of the best ever. It was all women who all were being vulnerable right away and compassionate with each other and kind and supportive. And it's like we had this very quick experience of emotional support where the effort just kept that everybody was putting in, like elevating the group really quickly. After that, I wanted to know more about you, and I found out you do this podcast, and I think hopefully we'll get together and figure out ways we can collaborate, because I think we have a lot in common.
Yeah, Gretchen, thank you so much for allowing me to come to that class. It was really the most perfect timing for something I didn't even know I needed to do at that time on that day. And I felt similarly that the way that you supported the group and got us rolling really created a very quick and deep safe space. So thank you for that. And I have my little horsey drawings still on my bedside table from that event. Yeah. So thank you for that. And it was really neat too to see all the different areas of overlap, and then you're local here, and so that's fun. Sometimes I talk to people that are in other countries and international travelers, and right now you're really probably one of the closest because you're not only local but on our side of town.
Yeah, newly local, been here about 1.5 years. We live in a really special little place, so I keep finding that I'm connecting with amazing people, so I'm not surprised.
Yeah, it's a wonderful community. But Gretchen, maybe you can share with us a little bit about your story, what brought you to the work that you're doing. I like to ask the question, what is it that you build or create? So maybe you can just give us the backstory, whatever you want to start. No right or wrong way.
Okay. I'll answer the question about what do I build, because I build emotionally healthy, performance-driven cultures for companies. And I do that by teaching emotional intelligence skills to adult employees, because while being a parent, social emotional learning is just part of the curriculum now. People that are parents understand this is stuff that we weren't taught that's extremely valuable in all aspects of life, but we weren't taught it, and nobody in the current workforce really was. It's come out after people that are working enter the workforce. And with the increasing amount of stress that's happening in the world, socioeconomic, political, always on news cycle, phones in our pockets, blurring of lines between boundaries. People are struggling to cope, and they need the skills to be able to really thrive at work. And I found it just very, not only important, but satisfying to help people get the skills they need to really thrive at work. So that's what I'm 100% focused on, and I do it in a lot of different ways, including using horses.
I love it. And so what's the story that brought you to doing that work, to those amazing things that you're building now? And it's fascinating to hear the idea of the joy that comes from it too. I feel really aligned to that, of helping people thrive. You could probably see that in some of the questions that I'm driven by. And then we'll zoom in too on the one we're focusing on today. But tell us a little bit about what brought you to that work.
I describe myself as a former toxic executive myself.
You were part of the problem?
I was part of the problem. And like most people, it was a blind spot to me. I'm 48, and I was in the entertainment industry from the time I was 24 years old in Hollywood. I became an entertainment executive. I worked in Silicon Valley tech. And I had just been so steeped and simmered in toxic culture. It was what I considered normal. And when I was in a position of power as a Fortune 500 executive, I just thought that's how it worked. And then I had a really big, flashy career where I had a lot of power in the sense that I promoted concerts for Kanye West and Jay-Z and U2 and, all these giant artists. So when I picked up the phone to call anybody, they answered. And people wanted stuff for me. Everybody wants tickets. They want access to celebrity. So I had just developed this whole identity around my work, my job, this kind of power dynamic. And it was actually during Burning Man at 2012 was the first time that I had a big reflection of myself in that way, because it was very anti-work at the time. I think probably it's changed to some degree, but there was no place to talk about work. And I just found myself in all these conversations opening my mouth and realizing I had nothing to say if I wasn't positioning myself in a way that people understood, how to respect me the way that I wanted and was used to. And I did not know who I was outside of that. And so I came back and went on a discovery. Who am I outside of work? And I just basically threw away the work version identity. And I had already done a lot of personal journey work, but whatever that personal journey work, it was on my spiritual side and not on my work side. It was really compartmentalized. But anyway, I wound up really actually being very confrontational after that about toxic behaviors, really boundaried, really unaccepting, which doesn't really work in a corporate environment a lot of times. I had a boss's boss that was like, the problem with you in a corporation is you're a maverick and we don't like mavericks. And that's when I was really being like, this isn't right, whatever the thing was. I wound up setting up my own company so I could create the kind of culture that I wanted to work at, and then kept on this discovery and found things over my own continuation of learning that were more and more blind spots. And it's really a constant journey of learning. And once I learn something and then it's transformative for my life, I can't help telling everybody about it. And then when it transforms their lives too, it's addicting to help people in this way where people come back, oh my gosh, my relationships are different. My relationship with work is different. My program has all these just giant outcomes with the people that participate, and then the ripple effect. Like this guy that's been in my program for 2 years, his people come to him constantly and tell them how his leadership, the way that he's role modeled it, has influenced how they are with their wives at home and with their kids. It's really fascinating. And I got here a little bit through a windy, bumpy journey, but it also really, I think, validates the work that I do with CEOs and executives, because I am one of them. I'm not someone that's just come from a place of coaching or being or caring practices and stuff like that. I've had this big corporate background, so I understand them. I understand the business needs, and I understand this other side and where they come together for businesses to thrive financially, which is why I say the high performance part. but also in a healthy way.
One of the themes that I heard within that is this idea that we think it's an either or. We think that either you address these emotional needs or you are somehow effective and financially successful. Have you seen that to be true as well, of this thinking it has to be this way or that way? What is some of what you've shown people that helps them recognize? I know there's a lot of data in connection to the outcomes of your program, and I'm sure that's a piece of it, but where do you start with people who maybe are still of this mindset that somehow this is fluffy or soft instead of essential?
I'll tell you, it's a challenge. And one of the things I do is commiserate with other people doing this work. But what I've found is there's basically 3 types of CEOs right now, or leaders, really. One is the conscious leader. They're like me, probably like you, where you've done a lot of your own work. You understand the value of this stuff. It feels like common sense that when people are thriving, that they perform better. It just is, yeah, of course. They value it, they want to do the work, and then it's just for them about timing and budget and stuff like that. The second one, though, which is the most amount of conversations, and I think the majority of leaders, I call the disconnected leader. There's 2 parts from it. One is they're just disconnected from the everyday experiences of other people. They're typically high performers themselves. Because they've been so successful, they probably have a lot of resilient skills to begin with. And they are disconnected from the reality of everyday people. They tell me stuff. They don't know that people are really stressed out right now, for example. I had a CEO of 600 people tell me in the last week that he has no culture problems and that if anything, people just need to work more. It was at the end of the call, but I was wanting to say, what do you think motivates people to work more? Please tell me, because I'll tell you that pressure no longer works. Being hostile, aggressive, abusive, shaming no longer works. People do not tolerate it anymore. And actually even throwing more money at the problem is only a temporary fix, because no matter how much people are making, most people have decided their own well-being is not worth it since the pandemic. And so the disconnected CEO just does not know that's happening. There's also a part that doesn't care. And that is the part
just
that
work
really...
harder. Like, why isn't everybody just working harder?
Yeah, just get it done. And then there is the later CEO, which is, right now I need to focus on revenue. We're pre-revenue, we're pre-profit, culture comes later, and that type of thinking. So with all of these types of conversations, I try to figure out where people are at and then reverse engineer into where they need to go. So for the disconnected CEO, I can have the talk on, is performance where you want it to be? When they say, no, it is not, then I can have conversations on what behaviors are you seeing, what is working to fix those behaviors, because stuff is not working. And then I can slowly get them into what the issue is. And one of the things that's really important for them to hear is that it's not their fault. And that helps open up the mindset shift that needs to happen, is that, look, we were all steeped in a certain kind of culture. The external factors that are affecting everybody were not created by you. And while we historically have had a viewpoint that it's not our jobs as employers to support people with their well-being, it might not be your job, but it is your problem. So you can choose to say, it's not my job, it's their problem. But if it's impacting your business, then why not choose to give them the tools they need to thrive so they can perform more for you and have well-being?
It can be both.
Yeah, it can be both. But it's an education.
So I hear like these different personas of sorts that come to you along that journey. And that, Gretchen, one of the problem I want to focus in on today is how might we increase flow and creativity to bring joy to work. So whatever kind of side of this, how do we bring that joy? I think we can throw in there that thriving. And I know there's many of different topics we could go down, but we'll zoom in there. And I want to start with thinking about what is it that people overcomplicate about this topic? If they are, let's say they are in or at least on this journey, why is it so challenging? And what would you say if only people knew?
I would say if only people knew that emotional intelligence skills are very easy to learn. People have transformation in 90-minute meetings, within 9 hours of 90-minute meetings. They are different people. So it's very doable, affordable, easy to have the transformation that people are seeking. They overcomplicate it because they don't understand it. And you can spend a lifetime developing all these like emotional intelligence skills, but once you've developed them and you're somebody like me or somebody like you that understands the learning process and documentation and workshopping, and I've been facilitating groups since like 2012. So once you know how to do those skills and you can apply these type of learnings, you can have very quick outcomes. And I wish people just would know that this is not a big lift. It just needs to be prioritized. It's that simple.
Wow. Yeah, on that needing to be prioritized, I think that speaks to what you shared about the value of the outcomes and the value of, I think of it as dominoes of sort, when you start to address this in yourself and understand these skills in others, just all those different interactions that could have gone sideways or could have become just even wasted time. If we're going to take the productivity, the CEO that wants those people back working, well, how long does it take for people when they're so nervous to respond to an email because they want to say it just the right way because you as their leader are so overbearing or something? Think about all of that time, even one example.
And I will give you a big example of wasted time based on not having EQ skills from my own experience, which was I used to be really quick to anger when I had a sense that a boundary was crossed by an employee. And I used to feel entitled to give feedback in whatever way I wanted in the moment that I was mad because I was the boss and they did something wrong. So I'm going to tell them because we need not have that happen again. And once I understood a few things about myself, that understanding my own quick to anger, and that anger is tied to a boundary that's been crossed. So that was an insight and a learning. And then how to ask questions to get to the bottom of that and then find out what the root is, and then have tough feedback skills to be able to quickly address it where I'm putting the problem not between me and the employee, but in front of us together to solve together. So we're working on it together. A perfect example is one time an employee talked to a very big client about something that I felt that she absolutely should have not had that conversation. I could not believe that she had that conversation. It was my conversation to have. I was mad typing, but I'd already done some of this work, and I stopped myself to back up, to do some exercises that I teach now. And I realized that I was angry because a boundary had been crossed by this employee. But what I realized is during the exercise that I had not communicated the boundary. It was not clear. So that was actually on me. So when I went to give the feedback, I started from the place of not, I can't believe you had this conversation. You had no right to do that. You were out of line, blah, blah, blah. And instead, hey, I realized you had a conversation with a client that I really think that I should have had, but I did not communicate that to you previously. And so I want us just to take some time to figure out some clarity around what types of things I'd like you to come to me so that we can make sure that we're on the same page before you do. Right, which then she's not defensive. Yeah. She was open. The conversation went great. We made a plan. I handled the cleanup from my lack of communication and boundary creation to begin with. Previously, what would have happened is I would have mad typed to her. She would have had a trigger automatic reaction to her boss being mad and feeling upset. And then her pattern was to go to 5 different employees at the company and spend about 3 or 4 hours on the phone, downloading, complaining, talking about this. So I would lose probably literally like 25 at least man hours. That's real money.
Yes.
That I'm paying them to not work because they're decompressing from a trigger that I could have avoided. And once I did, that lost time went away. So that is a perfect example, and it happens to every business all the time, times however many employees you have.
Wow. One of the examples that you just gave there that strikes me, like I'm seeing the visual of this, is when you said that instead of the issue being between you and the employee, it being in front of you and the employee, and you're on the same side going towards that. It seems to me like that in and of itself could be a sort of thought experiment to move or shift that. Do you have anything else like around that like where that stemmed from?
Totally, because I've been very inspired by a lot of different people doing great work, and this one is from Brene Brown, and actually an employee sent it to me, a podcast, and then she had a checklist that I started practicing, but the employee sent it to me kind of, maybe you need to work on this.
Hint. That's
funny
leading
thing
up.
Is,
leading up.
I know. Funny thing is, she called me at one point after that. She says, hey, did you listen to the podcast? And I was like, you know what? I listened to your stupid podcast. I am frickin' reflecting on it. Message received. Also, it feels very raw right now, so I definitely do not want to talk to you about this example that you have about what a terrible person I've been giving feedback for the last 5 years. Thank you very much. Talk to you about it later. Oh, Lord. Sometimes now it's not hard for me to receive feedback from junior people. But then I was already past the point of feeling like they didn't have the right to do it, but I was still in the place of wrestling with my ego about it. But also being able to communicate like, oh, this is hard. But Brene Brown had a 2-episode podcast I share with my people that do my program a lot. And then she has a checklist that over time I've adapted because I've used it so many times with so many different organizations. But ultimately, I'd say that a few of the key takeaways that I've taken from it is that you run through the checklist before you give feedback 100% of the time. That you give feedback within 24 hours, hopefully same day of the incident or the issue, so that it's not festering. That you take the time to understand what the ask is for the change you'd like to see, and get this, what skills, traits do they already have that equip them to get the job done?
Ooh.
Because when you tell them, here's what I would like to happen, but I'm super confident this is something you can do because you've already shown me you have the skills to do this in this way. So you're building them up for accomplishing the task, not tearing them down to make them feel deflated that they didn't accomplish what you needed. And then, yes, putting the problem in front of both of you together, not between you. And then also being very curious and open to their side of the story, because you do not have all the information, period. No matter how much we think we do, there's always something that comes out. One time I was having a situation where I thought I was going to give some kind of disciplinary approach, went through this checklist because I was seeing all this sort of bad behavior. When I actually went to have the conversation, open to hearing the feedback about what was going on, it was during the pandemic. It had been like 6 months, and this person had not left their physical apartment one time, had not been outside. And it hit me so deeply of, whoa, I had no idea, like no nature, no walking, no people, no nothing. And instead of what would have been like disciplinary, went to I need you to take a vacation for a few days, and I need you to figure out how you can feel safe about getting outside. You need to take your dog for a walk. You need to figure out whether your husband watches the elevator so no one else goes in. However you need to do that so that you can go outside, I need you to do that. And anyway, the way you give feedback is everything, and most of us weren't taught how to do it.
It's so powerful. In some of my learning experience work, I talk about the formula of learning being input, of course, the things we read, the things we listen to, plus output, doing something with it. We have to apply it, and sometimes we forget this piece. But then I have this raised to the power of feedback. Because if we want to grow exponentially, if we want to really see that progress, the earlier we can get feedback, the more consistently we can get feedback. And sometimes it looks like another person. Other times it might look like putting a podcast out there, hearing from guests and things like that. Or it can look like a lot of different ways. But I think that one of the pieces around feedback is we sometimes don't think we want it. We don't think we want to hear it because it feels vulnerable scary sometimes. Yeah, that vulnerability that we have to put ourselves out there. And so I don't know if you've seen that to be true. You spoke to it there in the feedback that you received when you weren't necessarily asking for it. But how have maybe you seen that be a piece of changing a culture with the people that you work with, the organizations you work with? There's a connection point there to the role of being comfortable with that feedback as leaders?
Yes, 100%. It is about your willingness to be vulnerable yourself. How can you expect someone else to be vulnerable if you're not willing to be vulnerable? And so the very last step of that feedback checklist, when I teach doing feedback, tough conversations, and I have people practicing, and when they're reporting back they're practicing, and I'm commending them on doing such a great job and celebrating their wins for getting different outcomes than they ever had before, getting great responses. To your point, seeing the impact of integration of the feedback, which is the most rewarding of great feedback. But the last question that when I ask, did you do the last question? And most of them will be like, no. Because the last question is, when you're giving the feedback and you're giving the feedback, you say, do you have any feedback about my feedback process? And it requires you to be vulnerable and you to put yourself in their shoes to allow them the space and forum to share with you as well. And leaders, they just cringe at the idea of it. But the most amazing thing happens. Vulnerability is a muscle. And it's scary, and it's this, I always describe it as this like quaking little doing a sport. If you go snowboarding or skiing like once a year, those muscles you don't use that are like quivering and so weak right then, but then 3 days in, they're already getting back strong again, and you can do more and last longer and perform better. But it's hard to be vulnerable at first, but the more you do it, the stronger you get, the better you get at it, and the more discerning you get about it. And that's a huge thing with vulnerability, is not everyone is safe to be vulnerable with. And knowing who and what you're comfortable with sharing with the person and their level of safety is really an important place to participate in vulnerability, because people get a vulnerability hangover. We all know that feeling. Maybe it's from having a little bit too much to drink or something, where you shared your life story with someone and you walk away like, why did I tell that person all this stuff? But you have to also be careful with vulnerability. It's not something to just open your heart and expose your belly underside to the whole world and let them have at it. It's something to regard with care. But when you do it with people at work in a safe way in order to connect, because vulnerability is absolutely at the heart of connection, that really great things happen.
Gretchen, that's making me think about organizations, and we're thinking about the way in which they approach this work. And I want to zoom in specifically on joy for a moment. Joy, creativity, like a lightness in the work culture. And then again, this juxtaposition with getting things done, with excellence. Do you think joy can be structured and designed for?
That's a really good question that you might be a better person to answer based on your work. I will say, though, when you sent me the prompt, your 12 favorite prompts, about flow and joy. So flow stems from being present, being able to access your full body of like inspiration to your gut access to your subconscious. Like flow is being in that state. It's super present. And so presence comes from this kind of work of pulling up your blind spots out of your subconscious, your unconscious, so that you are more of a whole healthy human. So they are directly aligned. And then when it comes to joy, I would say, and maybe this is debatable, is difficult to do if you're looking at Maslow's hierarchy if you are in a state of survival only. And I say it's debatable because at the same time, I have a dear friend who is in the Gaza Strip, photojournalist, and she did a photo album of joy of people in the Gaza Strip, and it was like children playing like a trampoline on a mattress in a bunch of rubble. So that's why I say it's debatable, because I think joy is accessible by everyone, because I think it has to be. I think it's part of survival. However, when you talk about being able to bake in joy into like methodology or being able to ensure that you have it inside an organization, I think the best place is to tie it to well-being. And then fun on top of that, but also encouraging well-being, encouraging connection, fostering connection, prioritizing people's livelihoods in a way that allows for joy, I think is the first thing that has to happen for joy to be real. Because I'll tell you, when I used to do this big values workshop, and I guess I still do it, I just don't really like market it anymore, but I do this values workshop with companies. So interesting. So this one company, the CEO was in the front of the room. There's probably 30 people in the company, tech company, Silicon Valley. I was going through all these values, and one of the questions I asked was, does this company prioritize fun as a value? And the CEO was like, yes, we do. It is a value. And everyone behind him was looking like, but of course they're not going to confront him about this, so they're all quiet, but I can see them behind him. It's not true. So let's unpack this. What does fun mean to you? So you can apply this. What does joy mean to you? It's going to be different for people. So when I'm like, what does fun mean to you? The CEO said, we can wear jeans to work on Friday. Okay.
So fun.
So fun to him. To him. That made it fun. And it was really laughable.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for sharing. But then also when everybody else started, fun for us would be, this is of course San Francisco, we could ride skateboards in the hallway. They had very specific ideas of what fun meant. If we had table tennis in the office, if we could play the video games at lunch, or like they had very specific stuff they wanted to do and that they perceived as fun. So I think also you have to understand what brings people joy and allow for joy to be a value. And joy cannot be a value if you are top down deciding that joy means that you're going to have 5 different types of coffee available to you in the morning. So it's not that simple, is it?
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. Thinking about from what is your definition? Where does that come from? And I think taking us back to that tie to being makes so much sense, because that foundation of safety and belonging and vulnerability in the right places and all of that, allows people to show up as they are. And maybe that connection, to your point of that being the foundation, allows them to get into a flow state. If we're going back to the idea of flow there in particular, when you're in that like work zone or play zone, but where time stands still and you look up and, oh my gosh, I've been doing this thing for 2 hours and I didn't realize that focused, that I would call it joyful focus.
Yeah,
maybe that's
I
where
love
it
that.
comes together, because when I'm doing certain types of, like in my learning experience design work, I love creating the activities. I love creating the nuts and bolts of it. The ideas, the instructions, I have to always work on, okay, are these super clear? But the idea and the inspiration and the imagination part of it is my favorite place to be. I could do that all day if I didn't have meetings and just be in there. So it's some of that piece that maybe we're after when you build that foundation.
I'll say, so one of the things that I teach, and like I'm starting to, in our core curriculum, I'm starting to do one-off workshops, and I have one coming up for capacity management. And I use capacity management because it's really emotional capacity management, which people are afraid of that term. But when you look at emotional capacity, it's on a continuum. Think about it on the one side being the thriving employee. And by thriving, all the things you just described: enthusiastic, energetic, strategic, creative, generous with time, adaptable to change, open, friendly, helpful. That's what happens when people are thriving. On the opposite side, we have it can get pretty bad. So really what companies usually see is overwhelm, burnout, sick days, bad behaviors like gossiping, explosive behaviors, passive aggressiveness. They see disengagement. 77% of the workforce is considered disengaged. So the problem is, and on the other side of that, by the way, is heart attack, stroke, right? It doesn't just end with that part. It just gets worse and worse when people don't have capacity. And I describe emotional capacity as that sense in your body, like when you have a hard day and you like shut your laptop or you come in from work or whatever and you think, I cannot take one more thing today. And you want to soothe yourself dramatically. You want comfort food. You maybe want a glass of wine. You want to go to bed. You want to watch bad TV. You want to be in a couch in a dark room. Like you really feel like I really cannot take one less thing. You are out of emotional capacity. And the problem is historically people inside companies and companies have managed emotional capacity only when it's at this place of people are barely surviving, instead of managing it and helping people and teaching them and having policy and process around managing it when they first start acknowledging, I'm feeling overwhelmed. Ooh, that's stressing me out. Those are the points that we can give them healthy coping mechanisms, have them take some time, take a walk, do a mindful exercise, like all sorts of coping skills that people have, and places for adding joy, because a lot of times we can't remove stress, but we can almost always add something pleasant and pleasurable and joyful in our lives, even if it's going to like snuggle with our baby or pet our dogs or whatever that is, to help basically reduce cortisol in your system and increase oxytocin, which metabolizes cortisol, so that you get back into a regulated state. All the things you talk about, joy, and that create joy in work, actually not just like simple joys and pleasures, but the joy of working happens when you're a thriving employee. People that are on the other side, no matter if they used to enjoy that same task, do not enjoy it anymore. So they are tied together with well-being and emotional capacity. So companies are smart to start helping them manage it.
Gretchen, when I hear the 77%, I've seen that statistic, employees are disengaged. Like, we can't not do this work. That's what strikes me. I think
people
the work
think
that
it's
I do is tangential, but it similarly is about human potential and people thriving. That's at the center of anything I end up being a part of. And I see that. And so we can't not. We have to continue to go forward here. I just finished Slow Productivity by Cal Newport, and he talked a lot about this, where people are right at the edge, which you described, when they say, I can't do one more thing. And he talked about how, in particular, in a society where many of us are knowledge workers, we're no longer just like outside working with our body as ranchers, although you have your horses, so you're doing that too. But many of us do not.
It's healing, actually.
Yeah, it's that balance. But he talks about how we can stack our calendar such that it is literally one thing after the other. And it falls apart quickly when one thing gets off because we haven't built any margin in. And so I was just imagining this idea of emotional capacity and thinking about the calendars that I see out there with the companies I work at, like the culture of back to back, or okay, we're going to start all our meetings at 9:05 or 10:05 to give everybody a little bit of time. But then each next meeting starts late and we're out of that. And so that was just some of the insights that I've been thinking about recently in connection to that.
Yeah. And that's exactly the type of structuring that matters, and culture on what matters. Like, also, there's one thing that's a really unhealthy culture that a lot of companies do is if you put in your calendar, which I highly recommend people block off in their calendar time for a walk, time to eat, time to whatever they need to do to help create and put in place the healthy things they need to be able to thrive. But then some company cultures will just write over those. So there's internal like policy type stuff that has to be committed to in order for that to work. But yeah, I totally agree. So one thing I do in my program is I teach emotional body mapping. What I recommend is the first step of paying attention for a week to that feeling when you feel like you're low on emotional capacity. Start noticing. The second thing is to start paying attention what happens in your body, how your body communicates to you, that's happening. So for example, it might be you get a feeling of a pit in your stomach. Maybe your heart races. Maybe you get little sweaty palms. Like, what happens in your body? Because usually your body starts sending signals that your cortisol is increasing, and you are reaching that point before your brain is able to identify what the issue is. And so the more you teach and map your brain to understand what those symptoms are in your body that happens, the earlier you can catch it. And that can be done for every single emotion. So I know now in my body, because I've done so much work, oh, that's anger. Like before I've registered that I'm angry, I notice my body. I get this feeling basically of this like rush that comes up from like down below. It just comes up and I'm like, oh, that's anger. Okay. But usually before I mapped that, I would have to be already in the behavior before having to backtrack, stop typing. But the more you can body map what's happening, the easier it is to catch. And then you have to also learn how to make boundaries. It's a hard one for a lot of people, especially women. But all of us as kids were taught to totally ignore our boundaries, to stand in line next to the stranger, to sit in Santa's lap, and to give the creepy uncle a kiss. Our whole lives are like, ignore how you feel, ignore how you feel, ignore how you feel. So it takes some skill development usually. But also, the more boundary people are, the more they're able to actually show up the way that you want them to. Because a really well-boundaried person that understands their emotional capacity, the first time I taught my team the term emotional capacity, the next day, a guy on my team, I said, Slack type, hey, can you and I catch up for a one-on-one? I need to talk to you about some stuff. And he wrote back instantly, I'm out of capacity today. Is it possible to talk on Monday? Used it right away. And then as a leader, I have 3 options. Basically, my options are to say, oh, thank you so much for telling me. Of course, this can wait. Or I can say, next best option, yes, of course, thank you for telling me. Why don't we plan some time to sit through and look at what's on your plate to see if we can adjust some things to make sure that you're not over capacity as like a course of normal everyday activity. And then the third thing is I might really need to talk to him. And so I can say, actually, thank you for sharing. I really do need to chat, but why don't we just do a walk and talk on the phone? And also, what I need to chat to you about, heads up, is not stressful. I just got to convey some message, and then maybe you can cut out early for the day. So I can support him to being better, and because he's been communicative and having a boundary, he creates the space for me to be a better manager and for us to do better work.
That's so good. It keeps coming back to me that why we don't do this is it seems like often is some sort of shortcut. We think that we can get there faster somehow, or maybe it's the leader that you described that was the CEO that was like, just get it done, just do more work. And I know we already unpacked this, but I'm still struck by this idea that we think it's faster another way, and yet this is the fast way, the deep
9 hours.
way. Yeah.
9 hours. I'm
That's
telling
not
you,
so much.
it gets done in 9 hours at a time. I will caveat that with there is a type of person that is not successful with this work, and that is the narcissist / know-it-all. So when I have somebody that comes in and says, I've already done all my work.
What does that even mean? Who has done all of their work?
Wow. I was like, that's super impressive. I've never experienced that myself. So really profound kudos to you. But there are people that's walls are so high, or they're narcissists where they literally do not have an ability to take in feedback that isn't positive. So there's a type that doesn't work. But for everybody else, it works. It works literally 100% of the time for people. And I'm not saying 100% of all the stats. I'm saying 100% of people that participate will be changed people because they will have new skills and uncover blind spots about themselves and be more empathetic towards other people that have blind spots too. But to your point, yeah, I don't even know if it's a shortcut, if it's just there is a lack of understanding that soft skills are the skills in a lot of ways, even though the research has proved it. For 30 years, people have been proving evidence-based proactive programs increase productivity for organizations of all sorts. But I hope I spend my days and nights having these conversations trying to help people understand, because to your point, like, how do we not do this? I don't know.
I'm seeing it more too in like the LinkedIn skills report and things like that. I think our language has come a long way. So I'm really hopeful too. I think that there's much less, I think at this point, lack of awareness. And now it's the remaining willingness maybe to take those steps. But Gretchen, maybe you can start to tell us about some of your programs, what it is you're offering, where people can find you, any other resources.
Okay, thank you for that. So my company is called MTO Agency. It stands for Made to Order, so MTO. And we are a brand and culture agency because I believe that brand is inextricably tied to culture. We don't live in a world now where you can just put some glossy image, external brand image out there and then have a really crappy culture and people not include all the stories from what people say about your internal culture as part of your brand. It's all included. I have a turnkey program called EQ at Work that is also very customized to the client, but it is a 6-month program that people can start and then choose whether people do get ongoing support or not based on how people perform. But in that program, it's 90 minutes once a month, very doable for even the busiest executives. Each one for those 6 months includes a new EQ skill training and then professionally facilitated small groups where they practice and discuss and connect in a way that also people don't really connect anymore in both remote and hybrid workplaces. And so they're actually creating connection. And we a lot of times do small groups cross-departmentally so people get to know each other more. That helps them develop empathy for their other coworkers. And right now we are doing a big research project. I partnered with Tracy Castle, who is a senior executive, like veteran researcher. She comes from Chiat/Day, Activision, big career in research, and we have put together a big research project around this. People get the pre-survey for their employees to understand where they're at across 10 really important KPIs, stuff like trust and leadership. We call it confidence in tough conversations, ability to manage their stress and emotions, the outcomes that we have in this. And then we do the program, and then we measure again after the 6-month time period. And we are including that research into the cost of what we're doing, because we are wanting to really help with the data arguments in businesses to help show that the performance increases. But if anyone's interested in both just the program, the research program, any of it, they can come to our website. I'm also starting to offer one-off workshops, and I'll be doing some webinars to give a little bit more of a deep dive into all the elements of the program. So that'd be probably the best place to find me.
Wonderful. Okay, we'll put all of the links in the episode description. So whether you're listening or watching on Spotify or YouTube or on Apple Podcasts, it'll all be there. Anything else, Gretchen, that you want to share? Any favorite podcasts or books? I see a lot of books on your shelf behind you. So any recommendations?
I don't like books. Yeah, I'll give a few. I'll say my very first entry into understanding my own self-awareness was through The Artist's Way when I was 19. So that's almost 30 years ago. I've been on this journey. Really, for someone very first starting out, it's very gentle. It's a little bit woo, so if that's not your thing, I would say just ignore that part and take what resonates. And then I'm a big fan of the presence process, which is not for the faint of heart. It is for someone who wants some self-awareness boot camp. That's a good one for you. I'm a big fan of all the Linda Kohanoff books because I love how she's brought in using horses as facilitators of this kind of work. I think all of her stuff is really profound and interesting. Podcasts you want to go woo-woo, I love Mooji, Mooji. He's a spiritual teacher, and the reason I love listening to his podcast is because I can listen and it immediately shifts me into a greater state of presence. So I love that as like a coping tool to help me shift my internal state very quickly. He's just in presence all the time, so just listening to his voice and the way he communicates shifts me automatically. And then, I don't know, I'm a horse girl and I'm geeky about the rest of the podcasts I listen to are like soil health.
I love it. Gretchen, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. I'm so looking forward to staying connected, hearing about the incredible work you're doing. Thank you for sharing your journey, being vulnerable with us, for where you started and what brought you to the work and all of this. Thanks so much for listening to the Building Thinkers podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. And if you enjoyed what you heard, please leave a podcast rating and review. That helps more listeners find us in the world of podcasting algorithms. You can find out more about my learning and development strategy services at buildingthinkers.com. And remember, there's no limit to what you can learn.